do my best to match up the enthusiasm that you guys showed in this code talking about energy in the context of Trump and Pence administration. So the next popular thing to talk about, as Rick said, is storage. So here I am talking about the state of the US storage market, and in particular I wanted to highlight a few examples of how utilities and customers are benefiting by deploying storage. A quick note about Greentech Media. We are a Boston-based company, been around for about 9 years now, and we have 3 different areas in which we serve, and we look at ourselves as the leading information services provider in the field of clean energy and more distributed energy, or the energy of the future, if you may. The first way we do it is through our news website, or greentechmedia.com. I highly encourage you to look at greentechmedia.com, even if you're not particularly a fan of green technologies, but we do cover a lot of things in the energy realm, and we do it through multiple formats, articles, webinars, podcasts, and in fact I was told by Steve that he learned about Greentech Media through our podcast called Energy Tech. The second line of work we do is market research and consulting. That's what I represent as part of GTM research. Within GTM research, we have different coverage universes. We started off covering solar and smart grid, then sort of evolved the smart grid coverage to call it grid edge, which is just a fancy term for saying things that are happening at the edge of the grid in terms of business innovation, technologies, etc. And then lastly, we also have our own events. We've had about 4 or 5 events every year for the past few years. Most of them, I'll acknowledge, do happen on the West Coast because that's where most of this action is. But we do actually have had events here on the East Coast as well. In fact, a couple of years back, we had partnered with Mass EC to do a event locally in Massachusetts and Boston. And we also been doing an event on New York REF, or New York Reform the Energy Vision Initiative down in New York for the last couple of years. So again, that you guys figured it out by yourself to again, encourage you to look at Utility.com. Anyway, so what I'm here to talk about today is energy storage. So very quickly, we'll start off with some deployment trends to show how nascent the industry is today. We've seen in the last 12 or so quarters that the industry has been going in sort of fits and bursts. We've seen quarters in which there have been spikes, and there are quarters in which the deployment sort of dropped down. And the bottom line here is that it's still a fairly nascent industry. If you look at the numbers on the y-axis, we're still talking about double-digit megawatt hours of energy storage, or you could convert that megawatts, and it's still roughly the same ballpark. So here we are talking about an industry that is still talking about megawatts and megawatt hours, and thinking that it can sort of conquer and help the overall energy sort of innovation. But we'll see where we go. One thing to note is that predominantly in the last few years it's been dominated by deployments on the front of the meter side, or in utility applications. In fact, most of these in 2013, 2014, and in fact partly 2015 as well, were in the PJM market, in particular the frequency regulation market within PJM to provide frequency regulation services. PJM took off with respect to frequency regulation because back in about a decade ago, when the Federal Energy Regulation Commission, or FERC, passed a couple of orders, 755 and 784, that basically asked all the ISOs and RTOs to particularly look at how they could allow storage to participate in providing ancillary services, and come up with sort of remuneration methodologies or settlement methodologies that would basically quantify the efficiency and the speed with which storage can provide these services. And hence we saw the PJM market take off. We haven't seen other ISOs and RTOs develop as much as PJM has because of the way in which they adopted or they interpreted the orders 755 and 784. But now what's also happening to see in the last few quarters is the blues are starting to grow up. In fact, the last 3 quarters in a row, we've seen that the blues, which represent the 2 behind-the-meter segments, the residential and the commercial, are in fact starting to look up and match up with what we've seen in the EV side of things. In terms of where are we seeing this deployments, the residential market has been dominated by California for, again, all the good reasons: high retail electricity rates, a self-generation incentive program that up until a few weeks back was paying as much as up to 60% of the upfront cost to deploy behind-the-meter storage. But also in Hawaii in recent weeks or recent months, because of their transition away from net energy metering policy to what is essentially now a self-supply tariff, which again encourages customers, again in the state of Hawaii where retail rates are at 30 cents and not as high as, rather pretty high, but Massachusetts not as high as Hawaii, but it's still competitive, I would say. But we saw that take place in Hawaii in the last few quarters. And then the rest of the market is dominated by a few states here and there where customers are deploying storage for purely backup needs. On the CNI side, again, no surprises here, but most of the deployments have been in California. A few reasons again here. The self-generation incentive program that I talked about earlier has been at play here. At the same time, a lot of the customers, the CNI customers, are beginning to use energy storage to help them with demand charge mitigation. Or reducing electric bill management needs by reducing their peak consumption and flattening out their consumption profile essentially. And then the other markets deploy about 40% of all the unit deployments. And lastly, on the front meter side or utility side, as I mentioned earlier, most of the deployments have actually occurred in PJM, and again, this is in megawatt hour terms. If you actually look at the same sort of breakdown in megawatt terms, on just power terms, the PJM market is much bigger than what we see on the SPY. Because ancillary services are a high power application, the megawatt to megawatt hour ratios are typically higher. Whereas California has typically traditionally deployed energy storage for capacity applications, deferral applications, and even before this huge spike that we are beginning to see in California. Starting as of literally Q4 2016, California still was about a third of the market in terms of cumulative deployments. I'll talk about California sort of in the context of what's happened recently with Alyssa Canyon in just a bit, if you've been following the news. But that's where we stand. So in terms of what's been driving this sudden sort of spike in energy storage, let's talk about some of the major events that the industry had in 2016. Let's start local, state of Massachusetts, and again this was brought up a couple of times during the introduction this morning, but Massachusetts has very firmly sort of or rather very aggressively looked at storage through a few initiatives, and these initiatives are in fact going to lead to a state mandate which should be coming up in the next 6 months. So Massachusetts DOER conducted a study back in 2015 and 2016 where they looked at the impact of or the potential system benefits of deploying energy storage and concluded that if Massachusetts were to deploy about 1.77 gigawatts or 1.8 gigawatts, roughly speaking, of energy storage in the next 10 years, the state would see $2.3 billion worth of net savings or net benefits. Not just sort of gross benefits, but net benefits. And if you look at the chart, the net benefits are not just sort of dominating a specific application. They go across multiple applications or multiple use cases. The biggest use case, of course, is we are in a region where peak power rates are pretty high. So just by reducing the peak capacity, again, sort of flattening the curve, if you may, there could be $1 billion worth of savings. In the ancillary services and wholesale markets area, again, which of course would require collaboration with ICE in New England and cannot be done at the state level. It would require some changes in policies and the regulatory frameworks within ICE in New England to encourage storage and compensate it for the benefits it can provide. But we could see about $400 million worth of savings in these areas. Keep going on the chart, TND benefits, which again, a lot of the distribution utilities here in Massachusetts can help, can deploy storage and in fact defer some of their distribution or DAT expenses. And energy cost reductions, which again are important given how we are in a market where natural gas prices are typically the highest or one of the highest in the region, in the country. And lastly, renewable integration cost reduction. Again, what storage does, it can act as a buffer and help mitigate and integrate renewable resources by ramp control or providing a firm capacity instead of the constant cycling that we sometimes see in renewable technologies. Again, this is an example here to talk, or rather a good example to talk in terms of what storage can do. If you just sort of extrapolate that and look at the entire country, and sort of assume that the type of benefits that we would get in Massachusetts would be similar in other parts of the country as well. Of course, that's a big if, right? Because capacity is not necessarily an issue in all the states. Similarly, a lot of states do not have as many renewable energy resources as we do. But if you start to look at Arizona, California, Nevada, they already are, in fact, ahead in terms of the level of renewable energy investments that they've had. So, you sort of apply a rough back of the envelope calculation. If you were to sort of extrapolate the same level of investment in storage across the nation, we could see, or rather, if you were to deploy about 160 odd gigawatts of storage, so we're no longer talking megawatts and megawatt hours as we do in storage industry today. But if you were to deploy 160 gigawatts of storage, it could result in billions of dollars worth of savings. In fact, about 50x worth of savings. Again, roughly, 50x, 50 states, right? But the bottom line again here is that it's not a net sort of cost technology, it's a net benefit technology. That's something that I hope we can take away from this conversation. Coming back to Allison Canyon in California. So I'll show you a timeline of what has happened in Allison Canyon. In fact, just yesterday, apparently there was new Allison Canyon was in news again that they have done some testing on the wells, and it looks like about 30% of the wells are good to go, and we might start to see those wells in action again. But anyhow, back in 2015 October, the leak in the reservoir was discovered. The leak lasted for about 118 days, 4 months, and some calculations suggested that about 97,000 tons of methane was released. So I can talk about cost, right? We didn't talk about efficiency as about earlier. So the cost of dealing with those leaks or the natural gas loss. Let's talk about carbon emissions that will result of that. But anyways, there are multiple reasons for which, and of course, health and safety. But multiple reasons why that's important. So Governor Brown declared a state of emergency back in January 2016, and then mid-February 2016, the leak was permanently plugged. And SCG, which is the IOU that serves part of Southern California, and SCE or Southern California as the other utility, were the two utilities that were impacted the most. As a parallel event, SCG was already in process of launching their LCR, or local capacity requirement RFO. I'll come back to why that was important. In April 2016, California, the energy agencies, CPUC, CEC, all came together and released an action plan. In May, the CPUC basically ordered SCE, or passed a resolution that would order SCE to undertake an expedited procurement of energy storage resources to meet some of the shortfall. And this was in May of 2016. In July 2016, now that SCG was already on its way to sort of procure some storage for their local capacity needs, expedited their own procurement timeline and announced 37.5 megawatts of energy storage, and about that equates to 150 megawatt hours of energy storage with AES and AES. The AES was the winner for that procurement. SCE in August and September 2016 announced 47 megawatts of new capacity through 4 different projects. And out of those 4, Two of the projects, 40 megawatts and 120 megawatt hours, are already online today. So you can talk about a timeline where the problem was identified in late 2015, in Q4 2015. The resolution was passed in May 2016, and by December 2016 we had 40 megawatts, 120 megawatt hours of storage on the ground running, helping mitigate the natural gas shortage in the region. And then some of the remaining 7 megawatts by SCE and 37.5 megawatts by SDG are expected to come online anytime now. So again, it was sort of a perfect storm, not an event that the energy storage industry would obviously hope to happen again. We don't want natural gas leakage. We don't want issues with our reservoirs, but it was an event that showed that storage can play a role of a good participant on the grid and help mitigate some of the challenges of the grid. There are a few other sort of parallel stories to keep in mind. This couldn't have happened here in Massachusetts or anywhere else. California, it happened because California already had a storage mandate to work with. California, as we know, has had a 1.3 gigawatt storage mandate for 6 years now. But what that mandate helped to do was it helped the utilities to look at storage more carefully. They were familiar with the technology. They were familiar with the different vendors. In some cases, they were already talking to those vendors. As a result of which, they could announce a procurement in 4 months and get those deployments done in 6 months since the award. So again, it was sort of a perfect storm, but there are lessons that hopefully the energy industry can take from this particular incident and use it to sort of apply in other places without us having to have, again, a state of emergency before we act. Some greedy charts here. I'm running out of time, so I won't spend time here, but these were the projects that were awarded. The biggest win actually, however, for 2016 was the FERC proposal. So FERC issued a NOPR, or a notice for proposed rulemaking, which basically requires the ISOs and RTOs to look at participation models that A, would ensure that storage can act as a participant, not just in ancillary services, as has been the case with the previous orders, but in other markets like the energy and capacity markets, where it's capable of, technically capable of providing the services. Incorporating the bidding parameters, again, the one thing that we obviously have been assuming that we know here is what makes storage unique is A, it's not a generation asset, it's not a load asset, it can act as both. That's a big plus. On the negative side, it's not an unlimited energy resource. It's a limited energy resource, so the state of charge is always going to be the biggest parameter to manage. So as a result of which, FERC has acknowledged that constraint, and in the order, or in the proposed order, has asked the ISOs and RTOs to incorporate those bidding parameters that would enable storage to participate in the energy capacity and ancillary services market. And lastly, reduce the minimum size requirement for participation from, in some ISOs it's 1 megawatt, other ISOs it's 5 megawatts, and a few ISOs it's actually 100 kilowatts. So it's coming down to 100 kilowatts of minimum size participation requirement across the board. And in fact, not just limit that to front of the meter resources, part of that NOPR in fact also goes into allowing aggregated behind the meter distributed resources to participate in all three energy capacity and ancillary service markets. So people who are looking for opportunities to influence regulatory developments or policy making, this is a great place to look at. February 13th, I believe, is the last date to submit stakeholder responses for this particular NOPR. And going back to the Massachusetts state mandate, January 27th is the last date to submit stakeholder responses. Now that the DOER actually just a couple of weeks back officially announced that it's prudent for Massachusetts to have a state storage mandate. Now the magnitude of that mandate is going to be decided by July of 2017, and they're looking for stakeholder participation and responses by Jan 27th, which is coming up 10 days. So these are some of the key policy events in terms of the business community. We've seen a huge spike in corporate financing, both in forms of venture capital as well as project financing for storage. For the first 9 months in 2016, we saw about $812 million worth of investments. A good portion of them actually, for a change, came from project financing. Whenever we see venture capital, we're still talking about pre-commercial, early commercial technologies. Now we're starting to see project financing, which means actual deployments are going to be, sort of come out of these, investments. One thing to point out here as well is what these numbers do not show are some of the M&A activities. And 2016 by far had two of the biggest M&A activities as they relate to storage industry. Total, which is a French giant, oil and gas giant, acquired SAF, which is a French battery manufacturer with actually US presence. Their facilities in Florida on coast. And everyone's favorite Tesla, of course, acquired a sister company, Solar Cities, and now they'll be joining forces to provide solar storage and electric vehicles to consumers. So there was a question here earlier about consumers. There are different companies that are looking to work with consumers as well. And as a matter of fact, there are a few incentives already for residential customers like us to buy EVs as well as deploy solar. I'll have to just really through the basic. How much time do I have? No? I'm done?
No. No. You have 10 or 15 minutes.
Great.
You gotta get your answers to the questions.
Sure. So I'll cover a couple of case studies here in terms of what this is again staying local with New England. Green Mountain Power, which is a local Vermont utility, announced an innovative pilot project with these are their terms, not mine. Innovative pilot project was something that they mentioned, college project. But they're looking to deploy about 500 residential behind-the-meter storage systems through 3 different models. The first model is plain vanilla sale purchase, where Green Mountain Power actually gets to keep a margin by selling these systems to end customers for about $6,500 per unit. The second option is where it would be still selling the system to the end customer, but adding a bill credit to the end customer in return for some control of that asset for use during peak demand periods. And why that's important is Green Mountain Power expects that by controlling those assets during those 6 or 10 peak demand periods in a year, it can save on the forward capacity charges that it pays to ISO New England, as well as save on some transmission costs. And it expects that through those savings, through that control, they'll be able to save $81,000 per year for the next 10 years. The third model is all the more interesting. It's a very standard zero money down lease payment or lease model for the end customer, where Green Mountain Power would add a rate rider of $37.50 per month to the customer, but get even more control of that asset, of those 200 odd assets, for again use during peak demand periods. And as a result of it, they expect the total benefit to be $125,000 per year. So what we see here is through these 500 systems, not a lot. We're talking about again, a few tens of kilowatt hours per system, and 500 systems, not a lot. But they expect a total grid service benefit of $205,000. $205,000 per year for the next 10 years that would basically benefit the ratepayers. Again, an interesting concept because we are talking about using a behind-the-meter resource that can be used as backup during power outages, and we all know Vermont gets a lot of power outages, but can also be used to provide grid services back to the utility and to the broader ratepayer community. I'll skip this one. It's not as relevant, but it again shows how storage is being used for mitigating demand charge payments by some of the CNI customers. This example here is again relevant because a second project of a similar kind was announced just last week by KIUC. But basically, KIUC's central generation as of 2015 consists of a big baseload gas combustion turbine and a few diesel turbines, and then there is a whole lot of existing centralized solar and pumped hydro. And you've heard this term, the duck curve. This is a duck curve in action. because of decentralized solar, and of course we're not even talking about the distributed solar that KIUC has a lot of, but a whole lot of load gets shifted towards the afternoon, late afternoon and evening periods when people are back from home and actually using electricity, and it goes down during the middle of the day when solar is at its peak and there is very little demand because people are out at work. So KIUC announced a 30 megawatt solar plus storage system back in about a couple of years back. The project is expected to go online any time now. I think most of the installation process is already finished. They're finalizing some of the pre-COD work. But anyway, so if they were to add that 30 megawatt of storage, only solar without the storage piece, it would sit on top of the red line, which is the net load. Which means now we're talking about a situation where an already existing or already sort of constrained grid would face more sort of stress of having to shut down more diesel turbines in the middle of the day, and in fact also impact the base load, the gas turbine. And as you guys know, or hope, or at least aware of, is turning on and off gas turbines or anything that has turbine causes a lot of startup and shutdown costs. And again, lots of efficiency, higher carbon emission per MBTU. So essentially, this would have resulted in a situation where the adding more solar would have led to more stress, more carbon emissions, and less efficient operation. But again, as I said, this is a solar plus storage project, not just a solar project. So what that results in is, instead of using that solar here in the middle of the day, that solar will be pushed out to the evening hours by adding a 30 megawatt, 52 megawatt hour storage system. And what that does is, it not only sort of releases some of the stress to the base load generation, but in fact it reduces or completely eliminates the use of diesel generation for a couple of diesel plants that they have running. So again, net savings in terms of dollars, net carbon reduction for those of us who care about carbon reduction, and moving to a grid that is more independent, to your point, about energy independence, as well as more efficient. Anyway, I'll leave you guys with as any market researcher should with their outlook. I'm happy to talk about why we see what we see here in terms of the growth in the market. The reasons are obvious in terms of it's a net saving, net benefiting technology, already seeing impact in markets like California, Hawaii, and Massachusetts. And happy to take any questions.
I have one question. Do you see electric storage being more used for charging at night and dispersing during the day? Well, like the last chart you showed, storing a solar power, just having at night, the opposite. Which do you see being the predominant?
So, can you just repeat that question?
Yeah, the question is, what mode of sort of operation do we see more predominantly going forward in terms of charging at night and discharging during the daytime versus using with renewable or particular solar, where charging with the excess solar and discharging at night or night peak hours? I think the answer to that question would differ by the market we're talking about. In markets like Massachusetts, where of course we are pretty good with respect to our, or rather progressive I should say, with respect to our renewable energy goals, but not as much as what we have in California, Hawaii, or Arizona. So markets where the renewable penetration rates are already pretty high, you could see more of storage being used in paired with solar, or in markets like Texas with wind, to help sort of integrate these renewable energy resources and use the electricity when needed rather than when it's generated. Now, coming to Massachusetts and some other state markets, or even New York for that matter, where it's a grid that is in a fairly sort of compact geographic footprint, where investments in grid updates or modernization would require transmission lines or digging in the middle of New York City or Boston. I can't imagine the traffic. So those are places where we'll start to see application of storage being used as a different technology where it would act, as you said earlier, where it would charge during off-peak hours. Now again, off-peak hours are not necessarily the same in all markets, not really the same as night hours, right? But in general, off-peak hours and used during peak hours when the peak demand is pretty high.
Sure. So my question has to, I don't know, is this on? My question has to do with when we see more changes in our tariff structure because of smart grid that comes into play, and when we see a more sophisticated tariff with more time of use rates, do you see this whole picture changing somewhat?
Yeah, we see that changing, and there are already quite a few jurisdictions that have either voluntary time of use status structure, and again, you're not talking about real-time pricing, you're only talking about time of use status that reflects broadly speaking the system peak load conditions. But in terms of, again, you're looking at, you need to look at states that are already further along the trajectory, like California, where CPUC has mandated that all residential customers are going to move to a time of use status structure by 2019.
Wow.
New York, through their REV initiative, is looking at, again, dynamic pricing, not just real-time pricing, but some sort of dynamic pricing demo projects, and those demo projects will sort of dictate whether or not they move forward with those policies. So I think the demo projects are already underway, and the second sort of phase of New York REV policy making is again underway, but I don't think we see any actual policy decisions on that before 2018, 2019. So again, the two of the most progressive states when it comes to energy policy making are looking at 2018, 2019 as the earliest time frame for more progressive or dynamic tariff structures. I think the rest of the nation would follow as well. But yeah, I don't think there are any other states, maybe Hawaii again, because of very unique conditions, is already looking at time of use tariffs also.
Question on thermal storage. You guys seem to be focused primarily on electric battery storage.
Sure.
And have you looked at thermal storage as a way to reduce heating, cooling, and HVAC operating costs in conjunction with battery storage?
That's a great question. So the numbers here, I acknowledge that I do not include thermal storage, and the reason for that is as you sort of use the phrase electric storage, you're going to be looking at electric storage, which can go in terms of electrons both ways. Thermal storage can come in form of electron and go out in the form of thermal output, right? But there are some interesting thermal storage companies that are looking at peak load shifting through thermal storage and HVAC sort of energy management. There are companies like Ice Energy has done a lot of work in California, and even here on the East Coast in Maine, I believe they have quite a few projects. Then there's a new startup called Axiom, which in fact announced a few projects with Whole Foods and Walmart, where they will be using ice storage to ice to provide sort of cooling the groceries, the preparations. So those are two examples of companies that are looking at thermal storage. But yes, I think thermal storage should be part of the solution, as should be efficiency and energy storage, electric storage, and everything else. But the challenge with thermal storage tends to be that it's again an investment that a lot of the businesses are not factoring in their decision making. So the challenges that a few people talk about earlier with respect to procurement decisions have to be dealt with. But yeah, in short, thermal storage is a technology that we follow but don't necessarily include in our tracking.
Okay, one more question.
Oh, let's see. Can I go? Does anybody else have one? A quick question. I look at your $2.5 billion in savings just for like Massachusetts. In 5, 10 years or whatever this business takes off, could it be as bigger an employer as the solar industry?
That would be the hope, but even in our, again, this outlook is on a business as usual scenario. We're not assuming any new policy sort of support to storage than what already is already announced today. But we see by 2021 the market is 2 gigawatts. To give you a frame of reference, solar was 2 gigawatts a few years ago. Today it's 8 gigawatts, or last year it was 8 gigawatts. 2017 it's going to be even bigger. So we are still about 6 to 8 years lagging behind solar in terms of where storage is today and where it will be even 4 years down the road. But yeah, I mean, what makes our storage unique is if you look at sort of utilities' approach and attitude towards solar versus storage, they're definitely a lot more accepting of storage because they see the importance of storage in helping them keep up the grid, make the grid more resilient, make the grid more efficient, and defer some of the costs. So that's probably an area where we see a lot of participation from the utilities and policymakers as well as the industry to work together on different technologies and different business models that help deploy more storage. But in short, we still about, like I said, 6 to 8 years away from sort of matching where solar is today.
So it would be great if Mr. Trump and Mr. Pence had some incentives for.
Yes.
All right.
That's a good idea, I'm sure.
Thank you very much.